He should not have said it out loud. But once the words left my mouth, there was no taking them back. I think my life might already be over. I said it quietly. Not dramatic. Not angry. Just tired. The kind of tired that builds slowly over months, until one day you realize you are not really living anymore. You are just moving from one quiet room to another. Clare Owens was standing across the broken fence between our yards. Rain was falling hard enough to blur the edges of everything. Her hair was already soaked, her flashlight pointed at the splintered fence post between us. For a moment she didn't answer. She just looked at me, not shocked, not pitying, studying me the way someone studies a sentence they are not sure they heard correctly. Then she said the strangest thing anyone had said to me in a long time. "That's not true," she said calmly. I let out a small breath that might have been a laugh. "You don't even know me," I told her. She nodded once. "I know enough." The rain kept coming down between us. The fence leaned toward the ground like it had given up too. Claire stepped closer to the broken boards and placed her hand against the wood, steadying it. "Robert," she said quietly, "are you okay?" 3 simple words. No accusation, no pressure, just the question sitting there in the rain. And the worst part was, I didn't know how to answer it, because the truth was something I hadn't said out loud to anyone, not my coworkers, not my neighbors, not even to myself. For 8 months I had been telling everyone the same lie. I'm fine. But standing there in the rain with a broken fence leaning between our yards and a woman who had moved in less than 2 days ago looking straight through me, I realized something I wasn't ready to admit. I hadn't been fine for a very long time, so how exactly had a stranger figured that out faster than I had? My name is Robert Hayes. I am 60 years old. And 8 months before that night in the rain, I had quietly given up on the rest of my life. Not in a dramatic way. No big decision. No moment of crisis. It happened the slow way. The kind where you wake up one morning and notice you stopped expecting anything from the world. My divorce from Linda was finalized on a Wednesday. I remember that detail because Wednesdays used to be our grocery day. For 32 years we went to the same store, same parking spot when it was open. Same argument about whether we really needed the expensive coffee. 32 years is long enough for routines to feel like gravity. Then suddenly the gravity disappears and everything floats. After the courthouse that day, I drove home and sat in my car in the driveway for almost 20 minutes. I didn't feel angry. I didn't feel relieved. Mostly, I felt empty. Eventually, I got hungry, so I ate a gas station sandwich that had been sitting on the passenger seat since noon. I ate it in the car because going inside the house felt like too much effort. That was the day my smaller life started. A very clean life. A very quiet life. I went to work. I came home. I heated up dinners in the microwave that still had Linda's preset settings saved on it. Popcorn. Vegetables. Reheat. I never changed them. It felt strange, erasing proof that she had once lived there. The house still carried her routines like a memory trapped in furniture. Her side of the closet stayed empty. Her favorite chair still had the shape of her sitting in it. Sometimes I would catch myself turning to say something to someone who wasn't there anymore. Then I would stop halfway through the sentence and go back to whatever I was doing. After a few weeks, I stopped turning. After a few months, I stopped noticing the silence. That was the worst part. Not the loneliness. The way I got used to it. I learned how to shop for exactly one person. I learned how to fill a grocery cart with the precise amount of food that wouldn't spoil before I finished it. I learned how to sit through entire evenings without speaking a single word, and eventually, I stopped expecting anything different. Clover Ridge is the kind of neighborhood where people wave from their driveways and mean absolutely nothing by it. Everyone is polite. Nobody is close. We have barbecues in the summer. Holiday lights in December. A neighborhood newsletter that nobody reads. I had lived there for 11 years, first with Linda, then with the shape she left behind. My neighbor on the right was Ted Garner, 64. Loud. Divorced twice and proud of it. Ted believed his experience made him wise. Mostly it made him confident about giving advice nobody asked for. He spent most afternoons on his porch watching the street like it was television. The house on my left. I barely noticed it anymore. The previous owner moved out almost 2 years earlier. After that, it sat empty long enough to become invisible. Until one late August afternoon, the air was heavy with that strange quiet that comes right before rain. I was sitting on my back porch with a cup of coffee that had already gone cold. Not doing anything, not thinking about anything, just watching the yard. Then I heard a sound that didn't belong. A car pulling into the driveway next door. I didn't even look up right away. That's how far gone I was. A new neighbor had arrived and I couldn't work up the energy to be curious. Then I heard something else, a box hitting the ground. A quiet word that almost sounded like a curse. And then silence, the kind of silence that happens when someone is trying to do something difficult by themselves. I finally looked over the fence. She was standing in the driveway with both hands pressed against the side of a large moving box, trying to slide it toward the front door. Slowly, carefully, the way someone moves when they know nobody is coming to help. She looked to be somewhere in her early 50s, auburn hair loose around her shoulders, jeans, gray shirt, a small paint stain near the sleeve. She didn't look fragile. She looked determined, like someone who had learned how to carry heavy things alone. I watched her wrestle that box all the way to the porch. Then she disappeared inside. A minute later, she came back out for another one. I stayed in my chair, told myself it wasn't my business, told myself she probably had help coming. Truth was, I had become very good at staying out of other people's lives, and even better at keeping them out of mine. The rain started around 5. Not a gentle rain, a serious one. The sky opened like it had something personal to say. That's when I heard the crack. It came from the fence between our yards. Sharp, sudden, the kind of sound that makes you feel it in your chest. I walked outside. One of the fence posts had split near the base. The entire section leaned sideways, hanging on by a few stubborn boards. One strong gust and it would collapse. I stood there in the rain staring at it. I could go back inside. I was very good at going back inside. I could deal with it tomorrow, call someone next week. I had a long history of choosing later. But standing there, watching that broken fence leaning further toward the ground, something inside me felt suddenly tired. Not tired of the fence, tired of myself. So I went to the garage, grabbed the toolbox, pulled on a jacket that barely helped, and stepped into the rain. I had just started bracing the post when I heard her voice behind me. "Mr. Hayes." I turned too fast. She stood near the fence line holding a flashlight, rain dripping from the edge of her hood. I hadn't told her my name. "Not yet." "Sorry," she said quickly. "Your mailbox. I saw it when I moved in." She nodded toward the fence. I heard that crack. Then she studied the leaning boards for a moment. "That post is going to fall." I nodded. "I know. You'll need pressure on the other side while you secure it," she said. Not offering, just stating a fact. Before I could respond, she stepped through the gap in the fence. Rain pouring around us. Flashlight beam shaking slightly as she pressed her hands against the boards to hold them steady. "My name's Claire," she said. "We worked in the rain for 20 minutes." She held the fence steady. I drove screws into the weakened post. The first 2 slipped in the soft wood. The third one caught. At one point, the boards shifted suddenly, and we both leaned forward at the same time to keep them from falling. And she laughed. A real laugh. The kind that surprises you. I laughed too before I even realized it. For about 4 seconds, I forgot what the last 8 months of my life had felt like. When the fence finally held, we stepped back, both of us soaked. She tested the boards with her palm. "That'll hold," she said. "Yeah," I said quietly. "Thank you." She looked at me again, that same steady look from earlier. "I heard it crack," she said. "What was I supposed to do? Go back inside?" Then she turned and walked through the rain toward her house, and I stood there in the wet grass watching her go, feeling something I hadn't felt in a long time. Not hope, not attraction, just the uncomfortable awareness that I had been alone for a very long time, and maybe, just maybe, I didn't want to be anymore. But the real question was something I still couldn't answer. If someone asked me again, the way she did in the rain, Would I finally tell the truth? Or would I keep pretending I was fine? The fence held through the night. I checked it before I went to bed. Then again before turning off the kitchen light. Then once more around midnight when sleep refused to show up. The screws were tight, the boards steady, the post leaning just enough to remind me it had been close to falling. I stood there in the dark backyard with a flashlight in my hand and realized something strange. It wasn't the fence keeping me awake. It was the question, "Are you okay?" 3 simple words. And the way she had asked them without hesitation. Not curious, not polite, just honest. I hadn't been asked that in a long time. Not in a way that meant someone was actually waiting for the real answer. I saw Claire the next morning before I was ready to. I was standing at the end of my driveway collecting the newspaper I rarely read. Still wearing yesterday's jeans. Hair doing whatever 60-year-old hair does when you stop trying to manage it. Her front door opened. She stepped out holding a mug in both hands, moving carefully like the coffee was too full. Her hair was loose and still a little damp. She noticed me at the exact same moment I noticed her. Neither of us pretended we hadn't. "Morning," she said from the porch. "Morning," I answered from the driveway. There was a pause. Not uncomfortable. Just 2 people standing there with a conversation that hadn't started yet. She glanced toward the fence. It held. I nodded. It held. She gave a small, approving nod, like that settled something important. Then she went back inside. That was the whole interaction. 30 seconds. But I stood in my driveway longer than necessary holding the newspaper and thinking about something that made me uneasy. That had been the best moment of my week. And it was only Thursday. Work that day felt like watching someone else live my life. Meetings, emails, nods, and polite responses. I answered questions when people asked them, and finished tasks when they appeared in my inbox. But underneath all of it, something else was running quietly in my head. I kept replaying the moment in the rain. The question. The look on her face. The way she had stepped through the broken fence without asking permission. By the time I drove home that evening, the sky was already fading toward evening blue. I parked in the driveway and sat there a moment. Then something strange happened. Instead of microwaving whatever frozen thing I had bought earlier that week, I cooked. Nothing impressive. Eggs. Toast. A pan that hadn't been used in months. But it was the first real meal I had made since the divorce. I didn't know why I did it. Maybe because someone had asked if I was okay. And somewhere deep inside my brain, that question had started moving furniture around. Friday afternoon, I was in the garage pretending to organize tools. Truth was, I wasn't organizing anything. I was just standing there holding a wrench and thinking. Then I noticed movement next door. Claire's car trunk was open. She was unloading long, narrow boxes. Flat-pack furniture. The kind that always looks manageable until you try carrying it alone. She lifted one end onto her shoulder and started walking sideways toward her front door. It wobbled dangerously. I watched for exactly 4 seconds. Then I walked over. "I can take that end," I said. She stopped and looked at me. Not suspicious, not grateful, just evaluating. People who have learned to do things alone always take a second before accepting help. Then she nodded once and shifted the box so I could grab the other side. We carried it through the doorway. Her house looked exactly like a house looks 2 days after moving in. Boxes everywhere. Furniture not yet committed to a permanent place. Lamps sitting on the floor because tables hadn't been assembled yet. "Bookcases," she said, nodding toward the box. 3 of them. "You read a lot?" "I buy more books than I have shelves for," she said calmly. "Where do you want it?" Quote. She pointed to the far wall. I set the box down. She went back outside for the second one. I followed without being asked. The third box was the heaviest. By the time we got it inside, she brushed her hair away from her face and looked at me. "You don't have to do all of this." "I know." She let me help anyway. She made coffee without making a big deal about it. Just filled 2 mugs and handed one to me. We stood in her kitchen because the chairs were buried behind boxes. The counter was clean enough to lean against. She took a sip. then asked a question that skipped every polite stage of conversation. How long were you married? Not what do you do for work? Not how long have you lived here? Straight to the real thing. 32 years, I said. She nodded slowly. How long since it ended? Finalized 8 months ago. She studied the coffee in her mug. My husband passed 4 years ago. The words landed gently, not dramatic, not heavy, just truth. Heart attack, she added. Fast, no warning. We stood there quietly for a moment. Then she said something I didn't expect. People think loss is the hard part. She looked up at me. It's not. It's the afterward. All the space where someone used to be. I nodded. The space is the hardest part. She watched me for a second. You stopped expecting things, she said. Not a question, a diagnosis. Pretty much. She took another sip. I did too. For about a year and a half. And then? Then it started to feel like a waste. That sentence hung in the kitchen. I didn't know what to say to it. So I didn't. Claire didn't rush to fill the silence. She seemed comfortable letting quiet exist. After a minute, she set the mug down. Do you know anything about assembling furniture? Quote, enough to regret starting. She laughed, a real laugh again, the kind that makes you feel like you've earned it. We spent the next 2 hours on the living room floor. Instruction sheets spread between us, little bags of screws rolling away every time someone bumped the cardboard. She read the steps. I sorted the pieces. At one point we argued about which piece was labeled G and which was labeled C because the printing looked identical. She insisted one was slightly darker. I insisted that was imaginary. She turned the instruction sheet around and proved I was wrong. I accepted defeat with dignity. Halfway through the second bookshelf, she disappeared into the kitchen, came back with another cup of coffee. She handed it to me without asking. That small gesture landed somewhere deep inside me. Nobody had done that in a long time. Just noticing someone might want something, without being told, without making a production out of it. When the final bookshelf stood upright against the wall, we both leaned back and studied it. Solid, she said. Solid. I agreed. She looked at me, not smiling exactly, just thoughtful. I don't rush things, she said. Learned that after my husband died. She rested her hands on the floor behind her. Rushing through hard feelings doesn't make them shorter. It just makes them louder. I nodded slowly. I've been doing the opposite. Not rushing. Just not moving at all. She considered that. There's a difference between stillness and hiding. That sentence hit something inside me I wasn't prepared for. Before I could respond, she stood up and stretched. I should start dinner, she said. My daughter's calling tonight. I nodded, said goodnight, walked back across the yard toward my house. The evening sunlight was turning the sky gold. The repaired fence stood straight between our yards. Quiet, steady. I sat down at my kitchen table, not the counter where I usually ate standing up, the actual table. And for the first time in months, I thought about what someone had said to me earlier that day. There's a difference between stillness and hiding. For 8 months, I had been telling myself I was being careful, taking time, being reasonable. But sitting there alone in that quiet kitchen, I realized something uncomfortable. I hadn't been careful, I had been hiding. And the strangest part was this. A woman who had lived next door for less than 48 hours had seen that clearly, seen it, said it, without accusing me, without making it a lesson, just telling the truth like it was the most ordinary thing in the world. I sat there until the sun disappeared completely. Then I got up, walked to the kitchen, and cooked dinner again. Saturday afternoon should have been ordinary. Instead, it became the first moment I realized something real was quietly forming between the two houses on either side of that repaired fence. Not something dramatic. Nothing you could point at and say, there it is. Just the slow feeling that two lives were beginning to notice each other. And that scared me more than I expected. Because the last time my life had changed like that, it took 32 years to come undone. Ted Garner, unfortunately, was the first person to notice. Ted had the instincts of a man who could smell neighborhood gossip the way sharks smell blood. He was sitting on his porch when I walked to the mailbox that morning, coffee mug in one hand, bare feet on the railing. Watching the street like it was his personal television show, he nodded toward the fence. "You fixed that thing yesterday?" "Yeah." "Looks good." "Thanks." He took a sip of coffee and tilted his head toward Claire's house. "New lady seems nice." I didn't answer. Ted smiled the way people smile when silence confirms something. "You two getting along?" "We fixed the fence," I said. "That's neighborly." Ted chuckled. "Robert, my friend, nothing starts more neighborly than fixing something together." I gave him the same look I had been giving Ted for 11 years. The look that meant, "Stop talking now." He raised his mug. "Just saying." I grabbed the mail and walked back toward the house. Ted's voice followed me. "Life's not over yet, you know." I didn't respond, but the words stuck with me longer than I wanted them to. The next 2 weeks moved quietly, almost carefully. Claire and I didn't suddenly become something dramatic. No declarations, no long emotional speeches, just small moments that happened naturally. A wave from the driveway. A short conversation over the fence about the raccoons digging through the garbage cans. One morning, she invited me to sit on her porch while she finished her coffee. We talked about books. Not serious discussion. Just the kind where people trade titles they like and laugh about the ones they didn't finish. At one point, she excused herself when her phone rang. Her daughter. She stepped inside to take the call. I walked home, feeling something warm and uncomfortable at the same time, something I wasn't ready to name. Then Ted decided the neighborhood needed a barbecue. He sent the text to half the block on Thursday afternoon. Burgers at 3. Bring a chair. Ted's invitations weren't optional. If you didn't show up, he would notice. And if Ted noticed something, he turned it into a joke that lasted weeks. I sat with my phone for a long time, staring at the message. 9 months ago, I would have gone without thinking. 3 months ago, I would have ignored it completely. Now I wasn't sure which version of me was in charge. Then I remembered something Claire had said. There's a difference between stillness and hiding. So I grabbed a folding chair and walked across the street. Ted's backyard was already loud when I arrived. Country music from a speaker on the porch. Charcoal smoke drifting through the warm afternoon air. Neighbors clustered together, holding drinks and talking about the safe, predictable things people talk about at gatherings like that. Weather, travel, local construction. I stood near the edge of the yard for a moment, holding a beer I hadn't opened yet, watching everyone the way you watch a movie you aren't part of. Then I saw Claire. She was standing near the food table talking with Beverly from the end of the street. A glass of lemonade in her hand, her hair tied loosely back. She saw me at the same moment I noticed her. Her face changed slightly. Not surprise. Something softer. Relief, maybe. Beverly noticed it too. Older women notice everything. She smiled at both of us like she had just confirmed a theory. Then she drifted toward the grill and left us standing there. "You came," Claire said. "You sound surprised." "A little." "Why?" "You seem like someone who talks himself out of things." That landed. "I'm getting better at that," I said. She studied me for a second, then nodded. "Good." For a while, the afternoon actually felt normal. Claire and I talked with neighbors, separated into different conversations, and drifted back together without planning it. She told a story about raccoons getting into her trash cans. I told one about Ted accidentally locking himself out of his house last winter. We laughed. Real laughter. The kind that arrives before you can stop it. For the first time in nearly a year, I felt like a normal human being again. Then Ted walked over. You could see the moment he decided to be funny. His grin widened, his shoulders squared like he was about to deliver a punchline. He looked from Claire to me. Let the silence stretch just long enough to get attention. Then he said it. Loud enough for the 4 closest people to hear clearly. "Well, look at this." Robert Hayes finally rejoined the human race. People laughed. Polite laughter. The kind that means, "Please don't point that joke at me next." Ted raised his beer toward me. "Didn't think we'd ever see you leave that house again, man. Good to know you're still alive." I kept my voice calm. "Still here." Ted grinned, then turned toward Claire. You responsible for dragging him out of retirement? Claire smiled politely. He makes his own choices. Ted nodded like she had confirmed something. Then he leaned slightly closer, dropped his voice just enough to sound serious. Just be careful, both of you. Starting over at our age sounds real good until it doesn't. He made a downward gesture with his hand. Trust me. I've tried. Then someone called his name near the grill. Ted walked away like he hadn't just tossed a small grenade between us. The air shifted. You could feel it. Claire stood beside me very still. Not hurt, not embarrassed, just quiet. Watching me. Waiting. I didn't realize what she was waiting for until it was too late. He's harmless, I said. He likes hearing himself talk. She nodded once. Yes. He doesn't know what he's talking about, I added. No, she agreed. But that wasn't the point. She wasn't waiting for me to dismiss Ted. She was waiting to see if I would say something true, something honest about what was quietly growing between us. Instead, I picked up my beer, said something about the burgers, and the moment slipped away. You can feel those moments when they leave, like a door closing softly. Claire stayed another hour, said goodbye to neighbors one by one. She said goodbye to me last. Her smile was polite, almost nothing else. Then she walked toward her car. I stayed another 40 minutes, laughed when I was supposed to, helped Ted carry the folding table back into his garage, pretended everything was normal, but driving home later. I already knew something. I had done the thing I promised myself I wouldn't do anymore. I had made myself small, just to keep things comfortable. And the worst part was, I knew exactly who had noticed. I knocked on Claire's door the next morning before I could talk myself out of it. That alone was progress. The old version of me would have waited. A day, a week, long enough for the moment to fade into something easier to ignore. But I had spent the entire night thinking about that barbecue, about the look on her face, about the silence that followed Ted's joke, and about the way I had handled it. Poorly. The door opened after a few seconds. Claire stood there holding a dish towel in one hand, which meant I had caught her in the middle of something real, not prepared, not arranged. Her hair was pulled back loosely. The kitchen behind her smelled like breakfast. She looked at me quietly, not cold, not warm either, careful. I owe you honesty, I said. She leaned one shoulder against the doorframe. Okay. When someone gives you a simple word like that, it removes every place you might hide. When Ted said what he said yesterday, I began. I started talking around it. She watched me, still calm. I should have said the truth, I continued, and the truth is, what's happening here matters. I gestured lightly between the two houses. I don't know exactly what to call it yet, but it matters. Her expression didn't change, and I treated it like it didn't, like it was something small. I took a breath. That wasn't fair to you. The kitchen stayed quiet. Somewhere inside the house, a kettle clicked off. Claire finally spoke. I don't need you to fight anyone for me. I know, I said quickly. I never expected that. She studied my face carefully. What I do need, she said slowly, is to know that when something matters, you're actually there. Not managing the situation. Not smoothing things over. Just there. That word landed harder than anything Ted had said the day before. Because she was right. I wasn't, I admitted, and I'm sorry. She held my eyes for a long moment, the kind of silence where a person is deciding something. Then she stepped back from the doorway. I was about to make eggs, she said. You want some? That was it. No speech. No dramatic forgiveness. Just a small space opening back up. I stepped inside. Claire cooked while I stood at the counter. Simple breakfast. Eggs. Toast. Coffee strong enough to wake the dead. We didn't rush the conversation. In fact, we barely talked at all. And strangely, that felt right. When two people are rebuilding something fragile, silence can be safer than too many words. At one point, she slid a plate across the counter toward me. You cook? She asked. Recently, yes. She smiled faintly. Recently? Started again a few days ago. What changed? I thought about the rain, about the fence, about the question she had asked. But I didn't say that. I guess I got tired of microwave food, I said. She didn't argue with that answer, but I had the quiet feeling she knew it wasn't the full story. 3 days later, Claire's daughter arrived. I didn't know she was coming until I saw the unfamiliar car in the driveway next door. It was a dusty sedan with a child's drawing taped crookedly in the back window. A house. A tree. 2 stick figures holding hands. The kind of drawing kids make when they're trying to understand the shape of a family. I was collecting my mail when the front door opened. A woman stepped outside carrying an empty cardboard box. She stopped when she saw me. We both did the brief mental calculation people do when meeting strangers. She had Claire's eyes. Same steady look. "You must be the neighbor," she said. "Robert." She nodded. "Meg." No handshake, no extra conversation. Just a quiet introduction. Then she went back inside. I stood there holding the mail longer than necessary, thinking about the drawing in the back window. Claire explained everything the next morning. We were sitting on her porch with coffee, the air still cool from the night before. "Meg drove 8 hours yesterday," Claire said, separating from her husband. I nodded slowly. There was a certain expression people wear when they've made a decision that hurts, but had to be made anyway. I had seen that expression before. I had worn it. "She thinks she waited too long," Claire continued, "to leave. She's beating herself up about the years." Quote, "She's 31, I said. "I know," Claire replied. "I keep telling her that. She doesn't believe me yet." We sat quietly for a moment. Then I asked something I hadn't meant to say out loud. "Did you ever feel that way? After your husband passed? Like you had lost too much time?" Claire turned her mug slowly in her hands. "For a while," she admitted. "Then I realized time wasn't the right thing to measure." I opened my mouth to ask what she meant, but the screen door opened behind us. Meg stepped out. "Mom, where are the extra blankets?" Claire stood immediately. "I'll show you." She went inside, leaving me alone on the porch. One question short of an answer. That seemed to happen often with Claire. Conversations that stopped just before revealing something important. The week changed after Meg arrived. The house next door had a different rhythm now. More movement. More voices. Claire's attention shifted inward toward her daughter. And that made sense. Mothers know when their children are hurting. I respected the space. But I didn't disappear either. That was the balance I was still learning. Instead, I started fixing things. Not as an excuse, actually fixing them. There was a loose board on my back porch steps I had been stepping over for 6 months. I replaced it. The gutter along the side of my house had been pulling away since last spring. One afternoon, I borrowed a ladder and reattached it properly. Small jobs. Physical work. The kind that quiets your thoughts because your hands are busy. I was halfway up that ladder tightening a bracket when Meg stepped out into the yard. She stood there holding a mug, looking at nothing in particular, the way people do when their minds are somewhere else entirely. "It gets easier," I said from the ladder. She looked up quickly, startled. "Does it?" she asked. "Or is that just something people say?" I climbed down slowly, considered the question. "Both," I said. "For a while you say it because you're supposed to. And then one day you realize you actually mean it." Meg studied me for a moment. "Did that happen to you?" "Eventually." "How long?" Quote, "Longer than it should have," I admitted, "because I spent most of it hiding." She nodded slowly, then said something unexpected. "My mom talks about you." I didn't respond right away. "Not a lot," she added quickly, "just enough." Then she went back inside, leaving me standing there in the quiet afternoon, thinking about those 2 words. Just enough. And wondering exactly what Claire had been saying. The power went out just after dinner. Not just my house. The whole east side of Clover Ridge. 1 second the kitchen lights were on. The refrigerator humming quietly in the corner. The next second, everything snapped off at once. The house dropped into a heavy silence that felt almost physical. I stood there for a moment, holding the dish towel I had been using to dry a plate, waiting for the lights to flicker back. They didn't. Outside, the street was dark. Not the gentle kind of dark that comes after sunset, the kind that arrives suddenly and makes every house look unfamiliar. A wind had picked up sometime during dinner. I hadn't noticed it before. Now it pushed through the trees hard enough to make the branches creak. I grabbed the flashlight from the drawer beside the refrigerator, walked to the back window. Claire's house was completely dark. No porch light, no kitchen glow, just shadow. That's when I remembered the key. She had given it to me 2 days earlier. No ceremony, no speech. Just placed it on the porch railing next to my coffee mug while we were talking. "In case something happens and I'm not home," she said. "Meg gets anxious in the dark." She paused, then added something that caught me off guard. "And you're responsible with things." I hadn't even noticed when I slipped the key into my jacket pocket, but now I could feel it there, small, brass, heavier than it had any right to be. I crossed the yard in the dark. The wind was stronger out there, carrying the smell of rain somewhere in the distance. I knocked twice on Claire's back door. "Claire?" No answer. I knocked again. Then a voice came from inside. Careful, not frightened. "Hello?" "It's Robert," I said through the door. "From next door." Quote. There was a pause. "My mom went to the pharmacy," Meg said. "She's not back yet. You okay in there?" Another pause. Then, quietly, "The dark is a little much." I understood that. Dark houses can make your thoughts louder. I unlocked the door, stepped inside. The house smelled like dinner. Something with garlic and tomato. My flashlight beam moved slowly across the kitchen until it found the drawer Claire had mentioned. Emergency candles. I lit 4 of them. Set them around the living room. The small flames filled the house with a soft yellow glow that pushed the darkness back just enough. Meg was sitting on the couch, knees pulled up, hands wrapped around a mug. She looked at the candles the way people look at warmth when they've been cold for too long. "Better?" I asked. She nodded. "Thank you." I sat in the chair across from her. Neither of us spoke for a while. Sometimes silence is the kindest thing you can offer someone who's already carrying too much noise inside their head. The wind rattled a loose branch somewhere outside. Meg glanced toward the window. "It's strange," she said after a minute. "What is?" Quote, "How quickly everything changes." She gestured vaguely around the room. "A few months ago, I thought I knew exactly what my life looked like. And now I'm sleeping in my childhood bedroom again." I leaned back slightly in the chair. "That part doesn't mean you failed," I said. "It just means you made a decision." She looked at the candle flame in front of her. "Did you feel like that when your marriage ended?" "Yes." "How long did it last?" "Long enough to think it might be permanent." She nodded slowly. Then, the front door opened. Claire stepped inside, holding a paper pharmacy bag. She stopped in the doorway, looked around the candlelit living room, then at Meg, then at me. For a moment, none of us spoke. "Power's out," I said. "I can see that," she replied gently. Meg shifted slightly on the couch. Robert came over. Claire's eyes returned to me. There was something in her expression I hadn't seen before. Not surprise, not curiosity, something warmer than that. "Thank you," she said. "Of course." Quote. She set the bag on the kitchen counter, lit another candle near the sink. The house settled into a quiet rhythm again. Meg eventually excused herself and went to bed. The wind outside had calmed slightly, leaving the night unusually still. Claire and I sat at the kitchen table with 2 candles burning low between us. Neither of us rushed to speak. Finally, I did. "I want to say something." She waited. "And I want to say it carefully." I rested my hands on the table. For almost a year, I believed something. That my life was finished. Not sad about it, not angry, just finished. Like the book had already ended and I was just flipping through blank pages. The candlelight flickered across the table. "You didn't rescue me," I said slowly. "That's not what happened. But you stayed real. You said honest things when it would have been easier not to. You treated me like a person who still had choices." Claire watched me quietly. "You did the work," she said. "I just didn't pretend I couldn't see it happening. That mattered more than you think." Quote, She reached across the table then, rested her hand over mine. Steady, warm, no performance, just presence. We stayed like that for a long moment, listening to the quiet house around us. Eventually, the power came back. The lights flickered once. The refrigerator hummed to life again. The ordinary world returned. Neither of us moved right away. Because something had already changed in the candlelight, and we both knew it. Morning arrived quietly, the kind of quiet that feels earned. Sunlight came through Claire's kitchen window in long, golden lines across the table where we had sat the night before. The power was back. The refrigerator hummed again. The ordinary sounds of a house waking up had returned. But the room didn't feel the same, because something had shifted. Not loudly, not dramatically, just enough. I woke up on my couch sometime around 6. I must have fallen asleep there after walking back from Claire's place. For a few seconds I forgot where I was. Then I remembered the candles, the conversation, the way her hand had rested over mine without hesitation. And for the first time in months, waking up didn't feel like returning to an empty waiting room. It felt like a beginning. I walked next door around 8, not with any plan, just a quiet instinct to be there. The back door was open. Inside, I heard the sound of a pan moving across the stove. Meg stood at the kitchen counter flipping toast with the kind of concentration people use when they're trying not to burn something important. Claire was pouring coffee. They both looked up when I stepped inside. "Morning," Claire said. "Morning," I answered. Meg held up a slightly darker than ideal piece of toast. "I might have burned these." "They look fine," I said. She studied the toast critically. "They're a little aggressive." Claire laughed softly. "Sit down," she told both of us. Meg set 3 plates on the table. Eggs, toast, coffee. Nothing fancy, just breakfast. But something about that moment felt different than any meal I had eaten in the last year. No television in the background. No quiet house echoing with absence. Just 3 people at a table, talking, laughing, burned toast and all. Meg didn't apologize for the toast again. And I realized something about that. When people start believing they belong somewhere again, they stop apologizing for small mistakes. After breakfast, Meg went upstairs to make a phone call. Claire rinsed the dishes while I wiped the table. Simple things, familiar things, comfortable silence. Finally, she looked at me. "You stayed," she said. The words were soft, but they carried weight. "Of course." She dried her hands on a towel. Most people wouldn't have. "I'm not most people." She studied my face. "You weren't 3 months ago." That was fair. 3 months ago, I would have stayed inside my own dark house and waited for the lights to come back on. 3 months ago, I would have convinced myself that other people's problems were not my responsibility. 3 months ago, I was still hiding. "Turns out hiding gets exhausting after a while," I said. Claire smiled slightly. "Yes. Yes, it does." Around noon, we stepped outside. The air had that clean smell that comes after a windy night. Branches scattered across the lawns, a few garbage cans tipped over along the street. Ted Garner was already sitting on his porch with his coffee. Of course he was. Ted noticed everything. He spotted me walking out of Claire's house immediately. Raised his mug like he was acknowledging something important. I raised mine back. But I didn't stop to talk. Because for once, Ted's commentary didn't feel necessary. Meg joined us in the yard a few minutes later. "Mom says there's a walking path behind the neighborhood." "There is," I said. "Through the trees?" "That's the one." She looked hopeful. "Can we go?" Quote. Claire looked at me, not asking permission, just sharing the decision. "Yes," I said. "Let's go." The path started behind the last row of houses, a narrow dirt trail that wound through thick trees. The neighborhood noise faded quickly once we stepped into the shade. Birds, leaves, the quiet rhythm of footsteps on dirt. Meg walked a few steps ahead of us, not talking much, just breathing, looking around. People who have been through something heavy often need that kind of quiet. Claire walked beside me, close enough that our shoulders brushed once in a while. Neither of us moved away. "I'm glad you knocked on the door yesterday," she said after a while. I almost didn't. "What changed your mind?" I thought about the last year, about sitting alone in my car after the divorce, about microwave dinners, about empty evenings that felt like blank pages, and about one moment in the rain beside a broken fence. "You asked me a question once," I said. "What question? Are you okay?" Claire smiled softly. I remember. I realized something after that. What? If someone asks you that honestly, you probably deserve to give them an honest answer. And? And the answer was no. She nodded slowly. I know. We reached a small clearing where the trees opened enough to let sunlight through. Meg stopped ahead of us, turned back. "You two coming?" "Right behind you," Claire said. Meg kept walking. Claire looked at me again, her expression calm, certain, not rushed, not hesitant, just steady. "People think starting over is dramatic," she said, "but most of the time it's not. No, it's quieter than that." She took my hand then, not tentative, not shy, just simple, like it belonged there. And the strange thing was, it did. We kept walking. No speeches, no promises about forever. People our age know better than to pretend the future is guaranteed. But we did make a small agreement. To keep showing up. To keep walking forward instead of hiding. And sometimes that's more powerful than promises. Later that afternoon, I sat on my back porch again. The repaired fence stood steady between our yards. Claire was in her garden pulling weeds. Meg was on the porch reading a book. Ted was still watching the street like it was television. Everything looked ordinary. But it didn't feel ordinary anymore. Because 8 months earlier, I had believed something. That my life had already finished. That 60 years was enough. That nothing new was waiting for me. I had been wrong. Completely wrong. Because life doesn't end when something breaks. Sometimes it just waits quietly. Until you stop hiding long enough to step outside again. And sometimes the moment that changes everything is just a stranger standing in the rain asking a simple question, "Are you okay?" I stopped giving up that Wednesday in late August. I just didn't realize it at the time. And now I know something I wish someone had told me sooner. Some doors don't open until you stop pretending you're fine standing outside them. And the moment you finally walk through, you realize life was still waiting for you the entire time.